So it's been a few months since I last played the entire Bioshock series, so you know what that means. It's time to play it all again. I first played the series like 2 or 3 years ago. I got the entire collection on my Switch for like $10 and just immediately fell in love. It might be my favorite game series of all time now. I'm going to talk more about why I love it when I talk about what I think they should do with Bioshock 4 because it all connects together in a way. If you aren't aware, Bioshock 4 has been teased and is currently in development. It kind of feels like it might be in development hell, but let's hope not. It was teased years ago and we haven't really gotten any information since, so I'm hoping things are going smoothly, but it seems like that's not the case. It isn't being directed by Ken Levine, the guy who directed both the original Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, and it's being made by a different studio. This all makes me very nervous, but I also love Bioshock 2 with everything in me, and it wasn't directed by Ken Levine, so I do have some hope. We only have a couple tiny bits of information about this game, and this video will build on that information while I talk about what I would do with the game if I were in charge. And I don't want it to seem like I think I know what's best. I'm not a game developer, I'm just a guy who makes videos on YouTube, but I do want to share some of my ideas and thoughts and what I would personally like to see in the game. So let's get into what I would like to see in Bioshock 4. The first thing that I want to see is for the game to return to a lot of the systems that were used in both Bioshock and Bioshock 2, a lot of the immersive sim aspects of those games. I want a collection of cool weapons on a weapon wheel. I want different types of ammo that you can find throughout the world and scavenge for. I want weapon upgrades that are meaningful and fun and interesting to use. And I also want the plasmid system to return. Maybe the actual resource that you consume to use the different plasmids could be tweaked to maybe like regenerate over time, but I want the plasmids to be an essential focus of the game. Basically, I just want the game to play like Bioshock and Bioshock 2 and Bioshock Infinite played, but especially Bioshock 2, as I think that has the best gameplay of any of the games in the series. There have been some rumblings that this game is supposed to be an open world, and that makes me very nervous. I would prefer if they didn't go open world. What made the original Bioshock trilogy really good, in my opinion, was that they had these handcrafted claustrophobic levels that had kind of secrets jutting off to the sides and little areas you could explore, and I loved finding those little side areas and secrets, but I think keeping the level design focused is the way to go for the series. There are just so many open world games at this point, and I love a lot of open world games. I loved Elden Ring, I loved Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I feel like every game is going open world, and Bioshock 4 could use this as an opportunity to go back to the kind of game that I think a lot of people are currently missing. The biggest bit of information that has been teased is that the game will take place in an Antarctic city named Borealis, and I think that is a really smart idea. It's been years since Bioshock released a game, and I think there would be a temptation to go back to Rapture, the city from the first game, the underwater city, but I think they need to leave that world behind in favor of something completely different. One of my favorite things about Bioshock Infinite, if not my favorite thing about that game, was that it managed to create a setting that was so different from Rapture, but was also just as captivating, at least to me. Columbia really nailed that environmental storytelling aspect of it, and it just looked so different, but again had this kind of oppressive nature that Rapture felt like it had. You trade all these blues and dark colors for these bright golden colors, and you see all the clouds, and it all looks so wonderful, but it's hiding something really terrible beneath its surface. And in that way, I think Rapture and Columbia kind of mirrored each other in a really cool way. Rapture was very obviously like a hellhole when you got into the game. It had people running around and splicers and everything was in disarray. Columbia is not like that, but it hides something probably even more sinister underneath its surface. And so because the worlds of these games are so important and so unique, I think it's really smart to have an Antarctic city as the setting. It's another city that's built in a place that should not be possible to exist in, just like the bottom of the ocean or in the sky. It also could be very visually distinct from both Rapture and Columbia. I've got, again, a lot of ideas for how I'd like it to look. I'd like it to look very clean and awesome on the surface, but maybe be hiding some sort of cavernous cave-like structure that is a lot more industrial and freaky. I'll talk about more of that in a second. And I also think it's really important that Bioshock 4 critiques some sort of philosophy or worldview. Every Bioshock game has done this so far, and I think it's a core part of the series. The first Bioshock took a look at objectivism, and the second took a look at collectivism, and then Infinite looked at a couple different things, but mostly determinism and American exceptionalism. Bioshock 4 needs to exist as a critique or commentary of something or some philosophy or some way that the world works in order to fit in with the rest of the series thematically. But now we're going to get into what I would personally do and the more specific ideas that I have in my head for for Bioshock 4, my wishes, my hopes, but things that almost certainly will not happen. I think that Borealis, the Antarctic city, should be a working colony that was described and maybe is currently described as some sort of wonderful city by the people that built it. I'm picturing it being built by like the government or another large corporation. It can be advertised as almost like people who go to work out in the oil fields, where it's like you'll work out here for a couple months, but you'll have all this money, and then for the rest of the year you can live off a good life and not have to worry about doing all that work, but you will have to do all this backbreaking labor for a couple months. But then in traditional Bioshock fashion, there should be some catch to that, like it should be inaccessible to anybody who doesn't sign up to work there, and it should be touted as somewhere that you can enjoy life and work a little and then retire in a couple years. But I think the reality of Borealis should be that the workers there are horribly mistreated and constantly experimented on. They should be living in a prison masquerading as a beautiful city. And that brings the idea that I talked about a little bit earlier, where the entire city, this wonderful Arctic paradise, should be built on top of essentially a massive mine or cave structure that all the workers work in. My thought is that this mine contains some sort of material that is similar to Adam from the first two Bioshock games. Again, that's the substance that creates splicing and allows you to modify your genetics, and that's what they use to fuel the gene tonics. So I think it should be that a company, or again the government, has discovered this large wealth of this certain material. Now they're bringing people in to extract that and then use it to sell it off to more people eventually. And then in that way, the game could act as a commentary on the way that workers are abused and the way that people are promised a better life by those above them that actually benefit from their own poverty and misery. You could even have a civilization above the mines where certain people that are wealthier, or maybe they're from the organization that created this thing, live and have this happy life, but it's almost like a kind of a play they're putting on, or kind of this front, so that people see it and they're like, wow, this place looks wonderful. But the reality is that it's all built on top of these people who are suffering down below them. If you watch my normal channel, then you know I'm going to throw in a reference to The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which has a very similar theme, but amazing short story. But let's get back to Bioshock. And then I think the thing that could kick off the entire story would be that these workers that are working down below could have a violent revolution or uprising where the workers start taking the atom for themselves and either splicing up, or maybe they've been experimented on by people that work for the corporation and now they've become kind of monstrosities or splicers against their will. And our character could be brought in by the government or corporation in charge of the whole operation in order to essentially stop the uprising. I think that would also be kind of a cool little nod to Booker DeWitt's character in Bioshock Infinite. He says he was part of the Pinkertons, which were essentially brought in to stop workers unionizing, and so I think it could be a really interesting parallel to that and would fit with the themes of that game. And then our character will eventually learn what's really going on and eventually rebel against the people that recruited him in the first place. Those are just kind of the general story beats that I'm thinking of. If the game were to introduce a morality system like they tried to do for the first couple games, they could do something where you could essentially side with the workers or side with the corporation that brought you in. You could have kind of branching paths based on your decisions there, but I don't think it should be too complicated because I don't want things to get way out of hand, essentially. A big theme in my wish for Bioshock 4 is not for the company that's making it to think they need to make the Bioshock game to end all Bioshocks. I think they just need to make a really solid Bioshock game that fits in with the current trilogy and gets people excited to play a game that feels similar to the ones they used to. Another aspect that we need to talk about is the Big Daddy. So every game in the Bioshock series either has a Big Daddy or kind of an analog for the Big Daddy. In Infinite, we got the Handyman, who I would have liked to see just a little bit more of in that game. But we also got the Songbird, which has sort of kind of filled that role in a different way. My idea for Bioshock 4's Big Daddy would fit in with kind of the theming and the setting, and it would have workers that had been experimented on and spliced with the genes of polar bears. And they were meant to serve the same function as a Big Daddy, kind of working all day long and repairing things and mining, but also being immune to the harsh conditions of the nature around them, like a polar bear is. And then they could be these horrifying half-man, half-polar bear hybrids whose minds are kind of caught between their animal urges and instincts and their human thoughts. That could also be incredibly intimidating and scary to come up against. You could also have some variety in these polar bear hybrid things where it's certain ones of them have different aspects of their body that have been turned into polar bear things, and some of them can have other aspects of their body that have been changed. I'm picturing having ones that are essentially further in the transformation process and are walking down on all four, or maybe some ones that are not as far in and look human, maybe from halfway down, but up top they're kind of turning into these horrifying creatures. One idea that they probably have to reuse, that I don't know if they should reuse, is the little sister concept. And I mean, if the game is connected to Bioshock in the way that Infinite was connected to the original Bioshock, then you would kind of have to have a little sister. And I'm thinking maybe it could be like a situation where the actual worker that has been turned into the hybrid could potentially be saved or cured, or you could just like kill them and take the atom for yourself. Or maybe something even more horrifying where it's like they do have these little girls that they've essentially spliced into the person who has the polar bear DNA spliced into themselves, and you have like the face of a little girl, I don't know, hanging off some dude's polar bear body. That's really horrifying, but that's just what I'm thinking of. I think it would be cool to roll the big daddy and little sister into one being and then approach that dynamic in a different way than what's been done before in the series. Another aspect of the game that I can really visualize in my head is how the characters would inject the plasmids into themselves. I think something that Bioshock does so well, and something that's become almost a staple for the franchise for me, is showing how using a plasmid or a tonic is a very painful process, and I want this to continue in Bioshock 4, but in a little bit different way. The idea that I have is a little different, but it would go along with the idea that is essentially a workers' colony of people that are forced to do this dangerous work. My idea is for there to be what could be best described as like maybe a large metal centipede-looking contraption that you put on your back, and then it like covers your spine all the way up, almost like Dr. Octopus arms. And then when you put it on, it could have dozens of needles that just like painfully stab into your back so it can attach itself to you, and that would be how you receive the plasmids or tonics or whatever they want to call it. It would go through that thing and then grant you those powers. I think it would be interesting to have the idea of the administration of these plasmids or tonic being entirely controlled through a machine like that, because then it would kind of reinforce this idea of like you are a worker that is essentially borrowing this from the people above you, and they're giving it to you for you to be better at your work. Because in the other Bioshock games, plasmids and tonics were like an industry that everybody had access to, and they were kind of monopolized and made into these kind of weird fun things that shouldn't be fun and are actually really horrifying. But I think it could build on the themes of the game that I'm trying to talk about if like the corporation that's in charge of this whole thing has full control over those things. They get to decide what they inject into you, and they get to essentially do that for you, and if you're not connected with them, you don't have that power. And I just think the image of like this essentially like weird centipede thing stabbing into you and essentially bleeding you dry, like you could say from an abusive employer, would just be a unique and like very painful take on how plasmids and tonics have been used in the past. I also think it could lead to some other cool moments. The image that I have in my head, which I probably shouldn't have, it's just because I'm a freak, I guess, would be like one of these polar bear hybrid Big Daddy things killing a worker by like forcibly ripping out their mechanical spine thing. And I feel like that would just be fitting for a series as brutal as Bioshock. Like imagine coming across a bunch of corpses that are missing massive chunks out of their back, and you're like, geez, something was here stealing these from them, and now I have to be worried about that. And then maybe your Big Daddy polar bear hybrid thing comes in and it's got these spines attached to itself in all these different ways. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just a human that's attached them to themselves in a bunch of different ways in a kind of body horror-esque way that's making them a lot more powerful. I just think leaning into like the body horror aspect of the series would be a really good way to go, because the series is brutal and gross at times, and I think that's kind of important and a way that kind of heightens the scariness of the game. That's another reason why I'm kind of worried about an open world, because I like the claustrophobic nature of especially the first two Bioshock games, because like if you ever did come across a Big Daddy, it was always kind of a scary moment because you're like, I have to not engage this thing because I don't have, you know, the room to get past it, and like it was really easy to get cornered in places and attacked by splicers. I hope they continue that with the new game. Bioshock Infinite kind of experimented with more open arenas for fighting, and they did a lot of cool things with like mobility with the skyhook, but I think overall I preferred just the way that the combat and battle arenas essentially worked in the first two Bioshock games. But I guess just making a Bioshock game has to feel like an impossible task, because like you can't go back to Rapture because that would be against the spirit of the series. It's always trying to innovate. But also making something completely new is kind of terrifying. You can't really trick people into loving your new Bioshock game by showing them familiar sights, but you also have to live up to the impossible expectation that was set by Rapture and Columbia. So I have absolutely no envy for the people that are working on this game right now. I can only hope that what they cook up is something enjoyable and also something that feels just like Bioshock. Too often, newer entries in games will try to modernize their formulas in ways that don't really work, or sometimes actively make the game feel less unique and more just kind of standard. And I really love Bioshock Infinite, but I can't lie, I was a little disappointed when the weapon wheel was gone and the weapon upgrade system was kind of redone. I think that game does so much right, but those little slip-ups just made it feel a little bit worse than they should because everything else in that game is so good in my opinion. And a new entry in the Bioshock series should have like increased graphical fidelity and stellar performance, but it should also lean on what made the old game so great. So what I'm saying is don't introduce a battle pass, don't sell us microtransactions, don't give us infinite ammo because you think the player will get bored of scavenging and scrounging up for ammo. Embrace all of those old aspects of the series that aren't like super cumbersome, and don't be afraid to make a game that takes its time like a lot of the old ones did. Let the player wander around, let them get lost and maybe even a little frustrated. It's all part of the journey. And please bring back the hacking. I loved the hacking. I had so much fun with it in the first two games. Maybe don't bring back like the pipe puzzle thing though. I know a lot of people didn't like that and it could get a little obnoxious after a while. If I were in charge of directing this game, which it's a good thing that I'm not because again, I don't know anything about game development, but I personally would like really focus on nailing the feel of the old Bioshock games and Bioshock 2 especially. I would have all of the new devs like recreate an area from Bioshock 2 like literally one-to-one, like obviously not using that same engine, but like just be like, okay, this is what an area looks like, have them recreate the player movement and have it feel exactly like Bioshock 2, and have them study like the reload animations and the way that the guns and plasmids felt, the lighting and all that stuff, and just the art direction. But then obviously just use those lessons that you've learned from recreating the feel of that game, because to me it's the one that plays the best of the original trilogy in my opinion, and then go and do your own thing, but again, have it feel so much like those older games. Because I think Bioshock 4's success as a game will hinge on whether the developers can faithfully recreate and then iterate on that process. I have a fear that they might throw everything out and try to start from the ground up, and that's not founded in anything that I've heard, but I'm still nervous about it. Game executives are far more greedy than they were back when Bioshock was first created. They always want battle passes and live service models to create whales out of gamers and just bleed them dry. I just hope the people that are in charge of this game and the creatives that are making it can stand strong in their convictions and be different. That's what made the original series so amazing, and that's why I can't stop replaying it. Again, I don't know anything about game development. I'm just a fan that really hasn't found a first-person shooter that even comes close to Bioshock, and I'm just hoping that Bioshock 4 can live up to that legacy. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you didn't know, this is actually my second channel. I have another channel named Davis Morgan that will be linked in the description where I talk about horror literature. Remember to subscribe to both of my channels, and please give me any of your thoughts on Bioshock and let me know if you thought any of my ideas were good or not, or whether I'm just talking nonsense the entire time. If you're somebody who's working currently on Bioshock 4 and you thought these ideas sound good, then give me your boss's contact info and I'll talk to them about it. No, I'm just kidding. But if you do have any suggestions for a game that scratches the same itch as Bioshock, then please let me know. I want to feel alive again and nothing else seems to cut it. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.